All right, welcome to the inaugural solution raising, where we are going to come up with a education solution within an hour. So what that looks like is to spend 10 minutes talking about the problem, what is currently happening in education, what do we see as the issues, what is working, what isn't, and what is happening in this space without necessarily explaining that something. What are projects you know of that are going on in education that other people could go and explore outside of this? Then spend 10 to 15 minutes talking about a potential future, an omniwin, anti-rival risk, protopian solution, however far in the future you need that to be for it to be plausible, just to get our juices flowing of like, this is what could happen if humanity worked together. And then spending half an hour discussing something that we could actually do right now if we had 10,000 people and $100,000. Something that doesn't require coercion or force or government involvement, just those 10,000 people creating a solution for themselves. And yeah, so that's what, and then the other thing I wanted to say is that let's have fun, because we're trying to come up with a solution to education in an hour. That's a little ridiculous. Let's just own that. And that it's a very short time period for each of these topics. Not everyone's going to get to say what they want. It's more about the conversation itself emerging, allowing it to happen. What is going to happen during this hour that would never happen as individuals coming up with a solution. And so if anyone would like to start sharing for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, what they think education currently is.
I don't mind going. I've brought a fair bit to this conversation anyway. I mean, that doesn't mean I'm not happy to let things emerge, right? But I have already brought a fair bit to this. To me, it seems pretty straightforward that the education system, the model for the education system we currently have, is simply out of date, right? I mean, it may have been a good thing 150 years ago when you were training factory workers, but given the rapidly changing circumstances and environment in which we can expect to be living for the future, training content and then the ability to regurgitate content is simply not fit for purpose. And so it seems to me that's pretty much what education is. Anything exploratory, the arts are de-emphasized because you can't easily assess and measure outcomes in these types of things. The willingness to experiment is all but vanished from schools. There's an atmosphere of fear, particularly fear of failure, but fear in general, of what if I do something wrong? What if I get something wrong? What if I make a mistake? This kind of thing pervades the entire fabric of education. I mean, that's my experience. I was a teacher for 15 years, so I have some personal hands-on, feet on the ground kind of experience in this. And so it seems to me that essentially the entire thing needs to be thrown out and something entirely new built. I say from the bottom up. I mean, Jubilee and I actually had a discussion along these lines not very long ago, and I know I'm taking up a lot of time, so I'll just say this very quickly and then I'm done. That the purpose of this conversation is to come up with an idea, something which could be worked towards right now. I kind of strongly have the feeling that to have a clear idea of where you want to go is actually a mistake at this stage, and that really the more appropriate question to ask is what kind of circumstances, what sort of starting conditions are necessary for a fit for purpose, flourishing education system to emerge from. In the same way that we're having this conversation, right? We're not starting with a particular goal in mind. In the same way we have a set of aspirations maybe, but not like a particular picture framework of exactly how the thing is going to look. And so I will stop there. Sorry if I run over.
Anyone else want to add to our current education?
Sure. Just one note, it might actually make sense to swap the last two spots on the agenda. So it goes, we cover what we're doing now, sort of what we could do, like our next steps. And then the last bit is, as we sort of built up towards it from the what can we do now conversation, there's that final, like, what does it look like if it's perfect, quote unquote.
Yeah, I'm doing it this way for a specific reason, but if it turns out it doesn't work this way, then we could absolutely.
Okay.
Like, that's the chronological order
right.
From where we are to the step to it's like getting our juices flowing so that we can think of the current solution. What is a little thing we could do, right?
I can see either working, just the flow being different. For my actual input on education, I mean, agree. It's sort of a mostly broken topic. Jubilee, I'm not sure what you found like going to our high school was like, but I actually credit that with doing a lot of good things, but it was also a really weird high school where they like the teachers went by first names, which is uncommon and also seems like it should be normal. It's a small thing, but I think it helped. And then also students that like actually showed an aptitude in something. Like for me, it was computers. For another guy, his dad owned like a local drywall company, and so he kind of got to skip a lot of his classes and just go to shop class and just sort of own that space. And the people who were into computers kind of got to ignore a lot of their. Like, I got excused from classes to go and help teachers with computers. I got excused from tests to go and like fix problems. And so it seemed like if it seemed like you knew where you were going, they de-emphasized everything else and off to the races. And I spent my last 2 years in high school mostly just doing IT work for a school, which I found quite useful. And that's all.
Yeah, I might just want to add to that. I still, from Eric saying that how kind of stressful it is, I still, when I have stress dreams, they are about finding my classes in high school. I don't know if that's part of just being an overly sensitive teenager or if it's just that scary of a time. But definitely seems to be more stressful than it should be. And yeah, you know, several hundred years ago, it was possible that a human could, through a lifetime, learn a majority of human knowledge at that time. But now we have more content appearing in a day than a human could learn in a lifetime. So yeah, the memorizing and regurgitating facts is no longer sufficient. I think our education systems throughout history have done a great thing as far as bringing the human race to where it's at, and now it's time for the next level.
I think the state of education right now, the difficulty with it is that we still live in this stage where we, like what Eric said, where we're treating students like they're still about to work in a factory. The issue is we are underestimating the amount of complexity that has always been part of how much ways there can be to learn and how many things there are to learn. And so now that we have access to communicating on way higher bandwidth, we start realizing, oh my God, not only is education ambiguous, but we need to find a way to keep education ambiguous so we don't leave anything out. But at the same time, we need to create a strategy to go from the factory worker mentality to a more stable, coherent, like second wave of education. And I think that's where we need to start. And we haven't even gotten there yet.
I think you guys laid out a lot of what is wrong with the education system. So I'm going to touch on things that I think are working in this space. I had mentioned before we went live to Nick that like the Khan Academy and MOOCs online. I don't remember what MOOC stands for. No, Adrian will know.
Massive online classroom. Massively open online classroom. MOOC.
And having technology available, having basically every piece of human knowledge available on the internet right now. The issues to me is that it's not organized and you can't access it in that way, and you can't learn the complexity that is there and access it in a way that you don't need to memorize it and can just access it. I also, in this space, my kid's school last year just closed and now she's in a regular public school, but she was in a democratic school, and seeing the difference between calling your teacher by the first name, having your teacher as a friend that you feel absolutely comfortable inviting over for dinner and comes to your house to interview you when needed and does these things that are just not done in the regular public school system. And now the difference is like my kid didn't need to know how to read when she was in that. It would have emerged in its right time. And now it's like she does need to know how to read because it's going to keep her back from learning everything that is based on knowing how to read in class and knowing, you know, your numbers. And you have to move this entire cohort together through the system so that the teacher has an easier job teaching. And there was much more, like the students spent their day playing, and the amount of emotional intelligence and interpersonal intelligence they got was way ahead. Like everyone I know who went to that school knows how to talk to an adult, knows how to have their ideas heard, knows how to, even in kindergarten, like at least by the end of kindergarten, knows that they have a voice. And I think that is huge. And so does anyone else know of any solutions that are happening in this space? I think Gabriel touched on our high school, which was a regular public high school in Alberta in the 90s and still was pretty awesome for what it was.
There's a documentary made a couple of years ago, no, more than a couple of years ago now. Anyway, called Waiting for Superman. Have any of you seen this film?
Maybe.
No?
Yeah, I think I saw that.
Bentley's nodding. That highlighted, I mean, it highlighted some of the systemic blocks that there are to actually, you know, a couple of commissioners, whatever, came along and actually tried to make changes, actually tried to make things better, bring in new models, and the resistance they met from the profession, from the teaching unions, as well as from the administration, you know, from the Department of Education and so on, was insurmountable, you know. So yeah, there's that, but it also focused on a guy who started schools. I'm pretty sure they were called KIP schools, KIP, and again, I'm not sure what that stands for. But these are schools particularly designed for deprived areas, inner city kids. Because, well, sorry, again, I'm going to go on for a minute here. I do apologize. But studies in education for forever basically have always shown that children, particularly black children, but children in general from deprived areas, never, ever catch up with their compadres in higher demographics, right? The outcomes, the results that they achieve, never, ever catch up. And it was thought that, you know, either the conditions in which they're growing up, or there's something about the genes or whatever, that it was just not possible. These KIP schools have absolutely turned that on their head by using this model of, you know, fantastic teachers, really highly motivated, doing it because they love doing it, that kind of thing. Kids who are involved in the planning of the curriculum and the organization of the school and the disciplining of other children. You know, it's really funny. He made a comment that, you know, after a couple of years of the children deciding on what the rules were, they came up with exactly the same rules that we had in the first place, right? But the point is that they own them, they enforce them, right? They are meaningful to you, they understand the point of them, right? And so, you know, the models do exist. Now, the Khan Academy that Jubilee mentioned as well, you know, models do exist, they are out there, but there are massive barriers to their implementation because of the bureaucratic structures that exist that must be able to compare one school with another, one student with another, give this, you know, 15% of them get A's, 20% of them get B's every single year, you know what I mean? This whole apparatus seems to me to be a huge barrier. However good your idea is, you know, however perfect an educational system you design, actually getting it implemented is a whole different kettle of fish. Right, sorry, again, I talked too long, I apologize.
Yeah, and if I could just add one point, you know, we're talking about the things that kind of went wrong, but there are some, like, we might say rote learning isn't something that we'd see in the future, but there are some types of knowledge that rote learning is important and can provide a lot of value. So I'm all for not having any,
for example.
Yeah, right. Because once you learn that, you can do the other math so much quicker in your head. It makes it easier. So yeah, so there's going to be times for all these different modalities of learning. But yeah, nothing should really be sacred in our current plan. We should be willing to look at every piece and break it and experiment.
We're at the end of this section. I also wanted to mention one of the things our current education system does for kids in particular is childcare. That is a big piece of that if people are working, and even if they're not, if they're just like have purpose, a place for kids to go and be kids together is a one of the pieces that education gives you that I think.
Yes.
So
socialization and the break for the parents.
yes, for both parties.
Right, for both.
That
Right.
place for you to go. Yeah. And so now we can go into the amazing future that however far in the future you need that to be for it to be possible. Star Trek, what does education look like when we have all the resources, all the power, people came together and made an anti-rivalrous omniwin solution? Would anyone like to start? Because I got ideas.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
I
me
think
too.
one of the really key parts that anything to do with like educating a populace has to take into account is what people are interested in. Like I've been interested in technology and computers since I was a kid, and I've worked with people who were not that way, whose parents put them in technology, they hated it, and candidly they weren't very good at it because it didn't speak to them. They didn't practice in their spare time. They didn't, go to hackathons. It was a very telling thing, and in tech that's rampant. There's people who love it and who do it on the weekends and evenings, and it's their life. And there's people who you can tell it's just a paycheck and they'll easily leave it, and that's fine. But the question is, if they weren't forced into tech, what would they have done, and would they have been world class at it? And I think that's a huge part, is having that be whatever schooling ends up being. You learn your basics. Like, you probably should be able to read and write and stuff like that at some point in time. But it's somewhere in there, there's that divergence where you spend time figuring out what it is you really like to do. Ideally, hopefully, maybe some amount of what do you already show some aptitude for, and then let that guide more specific learning to do with what you might actually end up doing.
This is also part of, sorry to jump in, I plan not to say anything in this because I've already talked so much, but this is part of a wider thing, right? Is that, if you want to do dance or you want to do music or something like that, if this is your passion, to actually be able to earn a living from that at the other end is extremely difficult. And so what you're talking about, absolutely, I agree with all of it, but it can't be done in isolation of a change in the society broadly as well, where these things are actually valued and rewarded, and you can live from doing them, kind of thing, or live independently of having to do anything.
Right. And that might be down the line with like how those courses end up. So if you say, oh, wow, I have an aptitude for dance or music or art, part of the learning might be, oh, okay, just so you know, at least for right now, those industries, you're rolling the dice as to whether or not you're going to be able to live comfortably. Here's some strategies. Here's some things. Oh, maybe also find an alternate interest, because I have interests other than
IT, for example.
Well.
Most I don't know of anyone that has a single passion, so maybe we need to change the words to say finding your passions.
True.
And always speak about it plural. And then helping them and also often passions are very are not like, it may not be dance, it may be physical movement, and then maybe woodworking is similar to dance unless you like the being in front of other people. And then maybe if it's the self-expression, then it's going into making movies or something. A guidance to make sure that if we're still in a game A world, that it could be something that they could make a living off of is interesting. And while I have the floor, the future, unless I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, is that the concept that learning is a lifelong pursuit. So you may spend a higher majority of your time during the formative years of being a young person, but maybe the processes that we build would be something that continue. It'd be nice if I had a way to track my learning. These are the skills I've learned, and here's a chart of that, kind of like they do in video games where you have skills and they build on each other. I've always wanted that, and there are some tools that then you can use that throughout your whole life.
I think speaking about the future, since you mentioned Star Trek and stuff like that, this sort of enters in that vein. I really think that just in the future, there should be a digital complex where we encourage diversity and being able to have modules, being able to, like, if you want to do dance, but you also want to do carpeting, for example, you could just mix that into a degree. And literally in the digital complex, there will be this almost infinite or innumerable library of videos that we can have access to that will be saved on a server. And the issue to me would be the issue of making sure that everyone has an individualized experience. So I think the future of education would be a mixture of finding a way to merge private tutorship with the digital complex of getting access to the lectures that you want at a certain time. And then, of course, you have to add, like what you guys were talking about, the final little sweet spot, which is you got to make sure that you get employment from that, and you got to make sure that it's accredited in some sense. It's not necessarily authoritarian, but you can actually look upon this library, and if you and people actually affirm what you've done, and it can actually get a good analysis.
I think in the future we're going to have education that's tailored to your interests for sure, and also to your learning style, and helping you figure out what those things are. So like Bentley said, we're having a way to be able to track your interests, having a way to be able to track your skills and as they increase, having a way to gamify that if you want to, and making it so that it is very individually based, but at the same time, as I'm able to learn math, people whose brains work like mine would be able to learn from what I've learned, right? So it could actually help you figure out what math course would be the best for you if you want to learn math. So like following your interests, but also helping you figure out what your learning style is, and having it be lifelong, where it's not about necessarily going and getting a 4-year degree, but hey, I want to take this math course, or it can offer, if you want to do this, if you're going to probably need this stepping stone to be able to understand that. And even if it's hard, we're going to try to make it as easy as possible within your learning style, and including virtual reality so that you could have personal one-on-one tutors without it necessarily being a like Nick doesn't need to teach Jubilee and take his time to teach me. It could be like a virtual Nick teaching me, right? So if you're an expert, and a virtual me teaching you. And so also, I don't think that we need to teach kids for employment in the future, because I think that employment with UBI and with other resources, it's not about making a living, it's about making a purpose. And so for some people, that's going to be very tailored. It's going to be you like tech and everything's tech, or you like medicine and being a surgeon and everything is that. But for other people, it's going to be so flowy. I mean, I watch how my kid learns, and it's like ballet 1 week and Minecraft the next, and being able to say, yes, follow your passion, follow what you want to learn, and then teaming up with other people that both have the skill sets you don't have to be able to work on a team and work towards a project from the age of 5 and 6. Like, why not work on projects? Why not have things that are actually tangible? Like what happened with the last week's digital native, having the students add to the learning curriculum, right? And having it be like, it's okay if there's millions of videos on World War II. Which ones are the best for your brain? Which ones are the best for you to understand? Which ones do we agree are the truth? And all the reason making, sense making and reason making technology that helps you have access to data that is usable and understandable at your fingertips, so that you don't need to memorize everything, and having it be. And I will be a little more silent because I just love living in the future.
Oh, just to add to that real quick, you can even make things more complicated as we're talking about the future. And I really don't think this is too far-fetched, but let's say I'm a teacher, I teach metaphysics, and I have some place to go. I can't necessarily be there live, or I can't necessarily produce lectures within a specific kind of way that can, like, let's say if you're more of a visual learner, perhaps I can't perform in that manner. Literally, and this is maybe 150 years in the future, when we have AGI, you will be able to take, using neural networks, all the capacity of my sense data, and then make it into, like what you said, like a virtual kind of thing. And then the virtual me will teach me, and it'll be a neural network, it'll be a hologram that can literally mimic me so perfectly that even it will teach me some new things about learning metaphysics. So there will not be this limitation about, oh, we can only learn what the human mind is capable of, but there will literally be these huge, undescribable branches going on in all these different directions, and that would take us forever to be able to like talk about keenly today.
I would like to think that in the future we've got past the notion of institutional accreditation, right? I mean, I've no idea how this would work. It's just a kind of picture in my head of this giant, like, interface of everything with everything kind of thing. And so, you know, sort of what Jubilee was talking about. I want to learn about this. Who is there out there nearby me? You know, I want to learn how to play the guitar, right? Who is there nearby me who knows how to play the guitar? And, you know, because we are no longer having to go out and spend 50 hours a week to earn our crust in order to keep our heads above water, people have time. And there is nothing more pleasurable if you're an expert at something, or even if you're proficient at something, to teach somebody and passionate about it, to teach somebody else about it is one of the greatest joys that there is. You know what I mean? And so everybody becomes potentially a teacher of things that they know about, and everybody is a learner of stuff that they want to know about. You know what I mean? And that is and that starts. You know what I mean? It starts at day dot and finishes the day you go in the ground.
Yes, and so let me see what we're going to say. Yeah, so I think adding on to all the virtual stuff that Nick was talking under the digital stuff, but also the ability to both find peers that are at the same learning stage as you in your physical space, which I'm a big person for digital stuff, but there's a place for real people being in physical proximity, or video, or, you know, just all the different ways that we can link together. Because sometimes the other person you want to learn with is on the other side of the planet. But if there is someone in your town or within driving distance or transportation distance, then it would be nice to have that as a possibility. And then as peers, and then also as teachers and as tutors, I kind of have the feeling that in the future, and I really think the biggest thing that teachers bring to the situation is really more tutoring than teaching. Just because, you know, there's many modalities for learning something, written, video, audio, that I don't know. There might be a modality to where you learn best from a human being, being interactive, like being able to ask questions or something. But I haven't heard that. But I think, but that still, I think, would fall under tutoring. Right now it seems like we have thousands of teachers creating their own curriculum, or when really they should be like adapting a curriculum to individual children. And I know a lot of them do that as well. And I could definitely be wrong about this, but it just seemed like there was a lot of spinning of wheels of teachers kind of spending time creating curriculum as opposed to adapting to each individual child. And of course, not being given the time to do that. But yeah, if the individuals can adapt the curriculum or pull it out, then that might be even better. But there will still be a place for specific teachers to help adapt curriculum to different people and teach them how to adapt it. And then not like essential accreditation. I don't see there being degrees, because that's kind of weird. The whole reason we have a degree is because it was simpler for people to understand. But if we have systems in place, then it would just be like someone else said, a document of kind of what you've at least attempted to learn, what you've spent time on. And then I don't know if we'll also want to have some sort of measurement system that says how well did you kind of learn this. I don't know if that's important, but it'd be helpful to have that knowledge graph of each individual. And then you could find, when you want to collaborate with people on a project, to find people that have the skill sets that might help the project, which is another thing we're doing.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to say about the future is that teachers, like when you have UBI covered, the people who are teaching are going to be people who want to teach, whether that's kids or adults. It's going to be that is part, and we're all going to be teachers and students constantly. So maybe I don't consider myself a teacher, but I'm teaching you the one thing that I'm adding to the curriculum. And also in the future, having maker spaces for things of all ages. So all interests and all, like if you can go and look under a microscope because you want to and see what things look like, be able to have actual access to that lifelong, shops that you can create, you know, anything your mind desires with the help of other people who that's their passion, right? Helping people create their vision to reality. And the more we're able to share in that, right? Share in tools, share in space for various ages and skill levels. Maybe there's microscopes that you don't get unless you're at a certain skill level, right? And what Bentley said, like knowing where your skills are so you can be matched up with other people, and a project can get the best people on it. A great team of people, right, who are top, but you can always work on a project. Like this conversation we're having, we're maybe all a little bit expert at this, but I think you could get any 5 people together and they could come up with something, right? And so it's like what what level do you want to talk to people at, but it doesn't mean that everyone can participate in it.
One more little tiny aspirational thing to add that came to my mind while Bentley was talking, that education in the future will be not about, as it largely is now, not about so that the world can judge you. You know what I mean? What do you know? How well have you learned this? It's not about that. It's about your own wish to find out about things and discover things and improve yourself, right? And so it actually turns the whole feeling of it, if you like, on its head. You know what I mean? It's instead of being viewed by the world because of what you've learned, you have learned what you've learned because you wanted to learn it. It's a whole different thing.
Yeah, I know Nick looks like he's about to want to talk, but I think Adriel hasn't shared in this section, and then it's time to go on to the next section of like what's possible now.
Sure. So building on Bentley's like statement there, one of the interesting things we're talking about sort of specializing in your interests and in your passions. I think part of that too is, and this is something that Gay May is terrible at, is they've just sort of grouped different skills for no apparent reason, like the term marketer or something. Like you need, 10 different skills that almost no one has that combination. And whereas somebody might be, great at documentation or explaining or whatever skill that is, that would also be useful somewhere else, and they're not good at, copywriting, but because they're in that role, that's just what they do. I think teaching suffers from the same challenge, where you have somebody who's good at like trying to relay information, to trying to sort of alternate how to explain something, but they might be not very good at making curriculum, and they might also not be like a world-class expert in that topic, so that 100% of what they're showing is as reasonably as we can be certain to be correct. So I think part of it is separating that. You have your library of knowledge. You have all of your curriculum made by people who are the best, who and not just the best as far as they know it the best, also they're the best at making curriculum, at making it so that you can take something complex and explain it in a way that can make sense to somebody who's 5 or somebody who's 10 or somebody who's 15 or somebody who's at a different stage in learning about that thing. I will just say, as far as accreditation goes, there needs to be something to make sure that like people know, like, I don't really care if most accreditation goes away, but like if I go to see a doctor, I want some assurance that they're that they've got some base level of knowledge. If we put an engineer in charge of building a bridge, I want to make sure that we can be as reasonably confident as possible that that's not going to collapse when 3 cars are on it at the same time. But I do agree that most accreditation is kind of pointless, and people just get a degree to tick a box. And then you end up with people who have master's degrees working in a job that you don't need a master's degree to do, just because they wanted to tick a box and get that thing.
Absolutely. So now we've talked about what's wrong and right with the current one, what it could look like in the future. Now we're going to go into something that is actually possible, that is an invitation, not coercive and force, that 10,000 people could get together and create with $100,000. So again, I have ideas, but if anyone else would like to start, and we'll just build on it. So it doesn't necessarily need to be something that is like, if Nick's thing counteracts my thing, that's fine. Is it doable now? Is it within that budget and that number of people?
I really think what's doable now, there's this thing called the Floating University. And it was this weird little micro project that was occurring somewhere. I'm not quite sure the year, maybe 2012, 2013. And it was 12 lectures from 12 really different topics, from demography to psychology to linguistics and theoretical physics. And if we could tap into that, I think we can create a medium between teachers themselves and a library of videos in order to be able to express themselves. I really think that that's possible now with a certain form of networking, an investment in servers, and just getting people to really express what knowledge that they have and be open when they're talking in a lecture. Like, for example, like when we're talking about accreditation and how it's kind of ridiculous in most cases, people should just say, okay, yeah, I'm going to teach metaphysics, but there are some things, of course, that I don't know about metaphysics, and let's walk through this together. And then you should feel like the lecture is interactive, and maybe we, with an application that reaches out to teachers, and creating that and creating a bridge into making videos. I think that that's really the easiest solution, and we can talk about how that would relate to physical spaces and with places without internet and the little complexities.
I have, we were talking about teachers. There was just this little thing that was like, a teacher spends so much of their time doing the class planning, right? Which I don't think they know how to yet tailor make it to the kid, especially within the current system. But having that be something that they could tap into a resource space and say, either this is what I did last year, and so I can just redo my own, but also sharing amongst each other so that they can say, like, here's my lesson plan, and sharing that with one another. So there's a database no matter what you're teaching. And then those could also be made available to people anywhere in the world, can be translated, right? So what happens in China to teach math, translated into English, is like, oh, wait, that's not what we do. This is really interesting. And could be a possibility, something that could be made now.
Such things do exist, at least in the UK. Such things do already exist quite extensively, actually. There's quite a wide network of teachers who share and use each other's lesson plans. They upload them to a website and other people can use them if they want to, kind of thing. So it does already exist. But I do agree with you.
Is that international?
I beg your pardon?
Is that international? Like actually, math from China?
If you go to tes.co.uk, there's a section on there, resources, and that's I mean, thousands and thousands of teachers upload lesson plans and tests and all kinds of stuff. And as you quite rightly say, there's no point in 10,000 teachers essentially doing exactly the same work, right? One person can do it well and everyone else can share it, you know what I mean? And tweak it as they want to for their own particular purposes, you know? So yeah, you know, no, I absolutely agree with that. It's a shocking, ridiculous waste of time, the lack of coordination of that kind of thing, especially given how standardized the curricula are. Again, I speak for the UK, you know, but basically every single school teaches essentially exactly the same content, you know what I mean? And they do exactly the same exams, and they do exactly the same basic mechanism of going from class to class to class to class to class. I mean, I really like your idea, Nick, of the ideas you've expressed generally throughout this, of a sort of blend between a digital library and actual teaching, you know what I mean? And I also think the notion that Bentley mentioned of the tutor role, you know, the guidance thing, not the delivering of content, but the guidance thing, I think is also a really important idea. The idea occurred to me of a sort of meta learning that needs to take place really quite early in life, you know, where you learn about your learning, if you see what I mean. And so you understand what works for you, and that would allow you to self-tutor to a certain degree. I'm not saying you wouldn't need some guidance from the outside as well, but you could do a great deal of self-tutoring in that respect if you had a nice wide open field that you can go. But all of this stuff, and this is really my point in this section, and I'm pretty sure Jubilee knows what's coming. But all of this is, none of these innovations are possible while the need to evaluate outcomes in this current way that we have, right, where, you know, this is your grade point average, this many people get A's and this many people get B's, and this many people go to this great university, and these people go to mediocre universities, and these go to shit universities, and so on. This whole treadmill thing, in my opinion, revolves around one thing, which is the notion of standardized testing. You know, in the UK, it's GCSEs and A levels at the ages of 16 and 18, respectively. In the US, it's the SATs. In the UK as well, even at ages 7 and 11, kids sit these standardized.
I'm just going to cut you off from the standardized testing topic, just because we're talking about what is possible, and so we can't change standardized testing right now.
But we can. That's exactly my point.
And 10,000 people at $100,000.
More like 100,000 people and $10,000, actually. Probably flip it around. Yeah, more like that. But yeah.
But then it's like finding those. But yeah, okay. So ending standardized testing would be one of the things that we could do right
now today for very little money, zero downside, zero risk. Because if you don't reach the threshold number, then nothing happens, right? And so nobody loses anything. All the people that have made commitments.
Yeah. And because there's also, like, even if schools are doing standardized testing, having a learning system outside where if it was engaging enough, kids would want to spend an hour to 4 hours on it a week learning with their peers. And to me, that is something that you can do that isn't requiring a teacher or a tutor. Sorry?
In addition to their 6 hours of mandatory schooling.
Yeah, I mean, if it's engaging, they do soccer, they do ballet, they do piano, they do, you know what I mean? Like, what do you want to learn? And here are other people who want to learn that, and then facilitating finding a course or creating a course. And adults can do that as well, right? Saying, hey, I want to learn.
I'm really sorry to be a naysayer, but what about all the parents that, you should be spending all that extra time gaining extra credits because you won't get into the top university if you don't get extra credits, blah, 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 blah. What about all that?
It isn't about convincing. That's why it's only 10,000 people, right? It's 10,000 parents or 10,000 kids. So it's about how could I get my kid something she's interested in without requiring, I don't need her to get into university. I want her to be happy. I want her to be engaged. So what resources could I create with other parents that are like me so that I could give that to my kid? And then I think other people would see what that gives to your kid and they would want to be part of it. But that's not a guarantee. That's just hopefully what happens. It's invitational, right? It's something that does give you something right away. It gives the kid enjoyment and learning. And if it's a feedback system or like, wait, they're not choosing to be on this, I have to force them to be on it. Okay, well, that's not working. What would make it more fun? What would make it more engaging?
Oh, just to add to what you guys are saying, and this goes into resources as well. And I really think there's a simple way to achieve these types of things in education, everything that we've mentioned. Indiscriminatory form of psychoanalysis that's individualistic. The main problem is that people, not teachers mostly, but institutions lack the basic decency and don't understand the deep complexities of a person's psyche to be able to even consider that as a category for making a curriculum. So if I just say something like, "Oh, just tailor it to someone's psychology," the typical reaction is like, "Are you nuts? How are we going to do that?" And I said, "Well, that's a good question. You could do that with $10,000. Oh, sorry. What is it?
100,000 people and $100,000.
Yeah, so you could do that because all you have to do is spark that attitude because we already think it's impossible. And that's why we continue to use statistics as a basis for measuring people and measuring how things are going and having all the grades. But in fact, we're using statistics on something that is very ambiguous when it comes to measurement, and that is the human mind. And I think it's absurd that we exist in this level of reality where it's like, maybe if we just find this one equation to kind of simplify how people act in groups, maybe we could develop a curriculum. It doesn't work that way. And that's why I emphasize on the digital space, because I really think there needs to be a form of preservation and a form of possibility in infinitely personalizing to the kids and to the people who are trying to learn. And you have to start with the digital first, because if you don't have that preservation space and you don't have the potential to infinitely personalize to the person's leisure to actually help them, then you cannot create a physical space that will appeal in every single thing the person needs psychologically. And that's my opinion.
So let me throw an idea out there, and it's kind of building on some things that people have been working on in like Khan Academy. Creating an online resource that builds a custom curriculum for each individual based on like questionnaires or and in the United States, we have the option of doing homeschooling. So the way of kind of getting them out of the 6 to 8 hour grind of school is, you designate your kids as homeschooling. We make it as easy as possible for the parents to do that and have resources to find other students in the area and other tutors in the area. And then the kind of system that tracks what you've attempted to learn, there might have to be a tool temporarily that matches it up against the standardized testing and the expectations of the area that you're in to help make sure that, and a way to take what your current interests bring that in. So if you're learning dance, if you like dancing, maybe learning about the mathematics of movement and stuff could help you learn enough about the math, which is kind of a thing we'd want anyways. And then kind of track your knowledge skill and help encourage you to learn the things necessary to pass the standardized tests. And then have it also include within it that record, so that maybe we can get beyond the whole idea of having to go to an Ivy League college, because there's a lot of evidence that there's not an actual value in the actual education. There's a value in having that name on your resume, but it's not worth the cost right now. So I think it wouldn't solve any of those issues solidly, but it sounds like it might be good to have kind of a platform like that would then allow us to experiment with Nick's ideas about using some psychology to focus it on what would be best for the student, and Eric's concerns about the standardized testing, create an alternative and show it working, or have a area to experiment with stuff like that. That then later we can use to convince others of these better solutions.
Yeah, I don't know how it is in the UK or in the United States, but I know here in Canada you are allowed to unschool your kid. You are allowed to not take them out of standardized testing, including in school, but then of course they can't get into university and they can't do those things. But also just to say that, like, my kid doesn't need this. My kid can follow their passion and do. And that's hard to do within a system where everyone else is ranked and it comes with a disadvantage. But when there's enough people who are learning in that way and able to come together and find their peers, and like, it starts to be omniwin from day one. Like, I already can see that after 2 years of school in the Democratic community, what that does for children and the teenagers that come out of that, and like, they're ready to be in this world in a way that other high schoolers aren't. So although they don't have the credentials to necessarily get into university, and a lot of them do, they have the skill set to be a lifelong learner and to critique things and to have their voice heard, which is better in some ways than having, in a lot of ways, than having the credentials.
Yeah. Just to add to that, and this is a problem with almost every field of study, and I've noticed this in Game B as well, where the hyper rational people like to think that we already figured out the secret to how to be a person. Now we can work on all the problems of, like, how do we communicate, how do we do this? But in fact, we have not found the secret to how to be a person, our own person, yet. So education should have that same thing. It's like, hey, I'm still figuring myself out. I'm a work in progress. I know some things and other things I don't. But if you look at any field of study, including education, there is still this myth that it's like, well, clearly you're alive and you're a person and you can think for yourself. That's enough. And it would be enough if education didn't have a specific definition of what a person is. We're all unique. We're all our own individuals. And immediately when we try to put personhood as a defined quality, that's where things break down. And that's why, like how you're mentioning, Jubilee, when we get people in that kind of environment and when we unschool them, we teach them social skills and we just get them in the raw realm of experience. And that's where things begin to learn. That's where wonder and curiosity and emotion and thought all grow from. In order to achieve this higher education of, like, oh yes, I want to think philosophically, I want to think about why I'm here, you have to have a stability in yourself where you feel like, I'm enough of a person that I feel like I can abstract from myself. But most of us, if not all of us, can't do that yet. And we shouldn't feel peer pressured to feel like we already have that luxury.
I just realized a pretty big hole in my suggestion. Is that a lot of people don't have the luxury to homeschool because it still takes a lot of attention or someone to watch. So you'd still need some sort of either do an actual school or have a resource to where parents can group together and create a space that their children can go during the day while they're doing their game A jobs. that they could then participate in a situation like this. So maybe also facilitating those that kind of school replacement for those that need it.
Right.
This is
Like,
it's
building
not really a
on-
specific suggestion, just a general point. But the notion of experimentation, space to experiment, several of you have said that in one context or another. And I wonder whether a good first step might not be thinking about how to create those spaces to actually experiment without it impacting too much on the people doing the experiment. You know what I mean? That freedom to experiment with stuff feels like a really good starting point.
Yeah, I think like building on what we've talked about, and with the like specific goal of the 10,000 people and $100,000, we talked about having some sort of like an online repository or marketplace for curriculum. I think if you like step one explicitly try to identify the different learning styles and specifically where existing education falls flat, and focus on the areas where typical education doesn't really handle it that well, and offer that as a tool to existing people and say, oh, if your kid isn't doing well in math, in standardized testing, that might be because they don't have this one learning style that education focuses on. Here's another 3. And then you can start to help kids, get better at standardized testing with education geared towards their learning style. And then also, if you don't care about that and you just want to learn it, same thing, same content. You're still learning it. It's just, do you have to learn it because you're trying to fit into standardized testing and you want to get into school and et cetera? Still helps there. Or no, it's not a part of that. My kid just shows like, they want to be an engineer, so they need to understand these topics. Great, you can go do that, even if your school's not testing for it or what.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good kind of path for creating this. Is start with augmenting the current education system with all the tools we've discussed, and then slowly dominate and replace.
Exactly. And then if it gets big enough, you might actually end up where, we actually made a deal with some schools or some educations where now you can get credits for it. You actually completed these sets of curriculum. You can absolutely do that. Like there are, if you make a deal with certain organizations, it's now like, yep, that counts as a credit. All these schools will accept it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and build it out to where the schools can also use any of the tools that we have and encourage that, so that they can, if they choose, they can start implementing this process internally.
Right. And then you end up with a full collection. And this might even sort of be related to last week's topic of the digital native system, where you have old students of that, like, who actually learned it, but were like, you know what? I didn't like how the existing curriculum taught it. Like, I did terrible in school because I didn't teach, like, I don't learn how schools teach. And so I struggled through a lot of it. And if I could then go back, especially if there was some sort of a framework of, here's the different ways people learn, here's the areas, we have this part covered already. The existing education system, if you learn this way, by hearing information and then you can write a test, if that's how you learn, you're already set. We can have some stuff for you, but really, you're probably off to the races anyway. Everyone else, here's the gaps that we're trying to fill. Sorry, if we don't have these ones yet, we'll try to get them. But if you have these 2 learning styles, we can help you now. Oh, now we just added the 3rd one and the 4th one. And start to build that content and then start to rank of, yeah, that helps my learning style, but it's not great content. Oh, that one is.
And I think a lot of it is possibly curating what's already out there in TED Talks and YouTube videos, in like having a database where it's like, here's what I want to learn, or if it's for kids, here's what my kid wants to learn. And then how you, like you said, if my kid's interests are ballet and Minecraft, there's a lot you can learn with that. Like, here's how they might learn math, and here is someone teaching that. And then it can also showcase what doesn't exist, right? Like, there are no ballerina math YouTube videos, strangely. So, but then people would know to create that, right? Guaranteed there's people who are into ballet and math who could make it, and then possibly putting them together with someone who knows how to actually make a YouTube video, right? So that you don't necessarily.
So it sounds a bit like you want the same sort of catalog that we've all mentioned, I think, in some form or another. You track what it's trying to teach you, possibly like auxiliary things of like methods to use, right? Like, hey, if your kid likes Minecraft, here's all the things on how you can teach different topics using Minecraft. But then a specific, here's what this curriculum, here's the learning style that it is, trying to help, or it's trying to appease or fulfill that need. And then, yeah, if you have essentially a database of curriculum with these, topics and learning styles, you can then say, show me the gaps. Well, look, there's no, or there's one piece of curriculum for, trying to teach math to somebody with this learning style. Let's go create that.
I don't know if this is impossible at all with $100,000 and 10,000 people, but having like my kid's on YouTube and she chooses what she watches, and there's of course the YouTube algorithm that tells her the next one to watch. But if it could learn that and actually be like, oh, you like Minecraft and LPS, here's math, right?
Oh,
like
absolutely could.
The one that comes up, and like add it onto YouTube where it's like, hey, this is actually going to teach them
to use the like sketchy social media, like trying to get your time, but like use it to help people.
But your parent, right? Your parent's the one who's like, I want you to learn.
Like YouTube Wikipedia hole. We're like, did I just learn relative physics? What's going on?
That's so funny because I am literally working on a neural network that already has that specific function. The neural network is not created for that function, but could very easily go in that direction because I'm trying to, because I'm very interested in the essence of thought, not necessarily computation or complexity, but the actual quality, the substance of thought, whatever it's made out of and how it operates metaphysically. And I'm trying to get the neural network to kind of move in that direction of like, okay, if this is implemented onto me, well, it could lead here. And then, oh, look at that. That could lead to that. And that could lead to all these other branches. And so that's literally what the neural network does now. And it didn't cost me any money. You just look up free neural network programs. And like most of this doesn't require any money. It just requires a lot of people willing to take the time to put in the research and then organize and actually be activists in that domain. But the difficulty is getting our psychological states in tune with what we intellectually want to accomplish, and then being able to network in a decent way to be able to convince people that, hey, I'm authentic enough, you can trust me, we just really gotta stick with it. I really think that those are the two key issues that we have yet to accomplish yet.
We only have a few minutes left. I just wanted to ask, we've come up with a lot of ideas during this half an hour. There are a lot of them very feasible with the $10,000 and $100,000. Is there anyone, like literally any of those things I would throw $10 at? Like if that could exist in 6 months to a year for me and humanity, I would absolutely put money towards that. Am I the only one? Like, would you need that to be exactly what you wanted it to be? Like all the features you want it to be and none of the features you didn't in order to put $10 towards it? Or would, like literally any step in the right direction, I would throw $10 towards? Am I the only one?
I'm the same. Like that if it seemed like it would go there. And to be fair, I think a lot of what we talked about, the technical part is fairly easy. A lot of it is based on like being able to categorize and like really dissect education and learning. Like most of my assumption was based on the fact that we've identified and, we know what the learning styles are. If there's still a bunch of work there to be done, we can't do that with $100,000. If that information already exists and we're just saying, oh, here's the 5, 7, 10 learning styles, however many there are, we can just plug it into a system, then it's actually fairly easy. And then it's just trying to get the content and possibly find existing content and categorize it.
Yeah, and I think to Jubilee's idea, just link to the existing content as much as possible, and have a resource to store it also. If it doesn't exist anywhere. I mean, I would put $10 a month towards that with just those goals. And then, if I see it completely going off the rails, then I'd stop funding. But I'd definitely be willing to put some money into a Patreon. And I think to get that started, you would need like a 1-pager. And then ideally, it'd be good to have some people that have done some work in this space be the people trusted to overlook the project. So I think those are the two things you need. You need a team and you need a description, a 1-page description.
Yeah, we're not actually going to do that. But you guys like to come up with a solution we could create. And then after doing several of these, showcasing that like 10,000 people with $10 each could change any industry. How do we get 10,000 people? right? How do we actually bring people together to have this conversation and then pick one and then like work through that process? But right now it's just, what is the possibility? What is the thing we could create? And we came up with a bunch, and it'd be like organizing, what would we need, right? What would we need to what are the features and benefits? And then what would we need for each feature and benefit, right? Learning styles. Well, there needs to be learning styles. We need to know what they are. Do they exist in order to be able to do that? And working through that process, which can't be done in an hour, but is absolutely possible. All of these things are feasible, and the kind of thing that, especially done out in the open with everyone being able to be involved, are amazing.
I agree.
Yeah, I think this was a good first solution raising.
I enjoyed it. All right,
Me
we can
too.
say goodbye. We can say goodbye to YouTube unless anyone else has any closing thoughts they would like to say on the solution raising.
Yep.
All right, goodbye YouTube.